UN75. If you also have any questions, please use the icon, the Q&A icon on the Zoom app, which is just right at the bottom, to ask any question, either to the panelists or anything that you're curious about knowing on UN75. I would also like to acknowledge our global partners, which are Global Peace, and also the European Students' Union, Junior Chamber International, the Commonwealth Youth Council. I'd also like to acknowledge the African Center for Constructive Resolution to Disputes, the UN75, United Cities, and the local government as well. I would also like to acknowledge one of our partners, who is the World Federation of United Nations Associations, and also our local partner, the Dream Factory Africa. So before we begin, I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers for this particular dialogue. I'll also first introduce our convener for this dialogue, who has made it possible before I introduce the distinguished speakers. So our convener of this particular dialogue is Barrington Chungulo. Barrington is an award-winning Zambian philanthropist, a social entrepreneur, impact leader, social activist, music promoter, a motivational counselor, a visionary. He is also the president and founder of the Dream Factory, TDF, and which is a Zambian CSO that addresses education, health, advocacy of youth, and also gender equality. Thank you, Barrington, for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I'll also introduce our first speaker, who's Her Excellency Dr. Justina Mutale. Dr. Justina Mutale has over 30 years of experience working in the diplomatic and international developing space. She's also an international development practitioner, I would say a social entrepreneur, a leadership consultant, an international keynote speaker, and also she's the president and founder of the Justina Mutale Foundation, through which she advocates for gender equality, women empowerment in the political and economic participation through trade, business, enterprise, by providing leadership and training and mentorship. Our second speaker is lawyer Mr. Elias Munshya. Mr. Elias is a lawyer by profession who uses a multidisciplinary approach to combine a passion for law, theology, history, politics to reflect on issues affecting both personal and national development in Alberta, Canada, in Zambia, and of course the rest of the world. He does this with the conviction that humanity's true greatness lies ahead of us. Welcome, Mr. Munshya.
Thank you very much.
Our third speaker is Mr. Dumisani Lingamangali Ncube. So Dumisani is an entrepreneur, a businessman, and an advocate of youth empowerment projects. Particularly in 2012, at the age of 22, to himself and two others of his friends developed a software which within 10 months of operation, the software managed to raise a turnover of over 200,000 US dollar. He is also the recipient of the Evolis Performance Award from France, which was able to acknowledge his business, and also this made him the first Zambian to receive this award, and also he was the youngest African CEO to receive this award. Our fifth speaker is Bertha Chulu, who is an adolescent activist and advocate. Bertha developed her passion as a young person in rural areas with a quest to end early marriages. In 2018, she was awarded first prize as the leading adolescent health activist in Zambia by SAT Zambia, that stands for Sexual Reproductive Health Rights Africa. Welcome, Bertha.
Thank you so much.
Our sixth panelist who's joining us later is Mwilah Bwanga. Mwilah is an accomplished and energetic youth leader, award-winning author of 4 books, only at the age of 25. He is also an international relations expert with a solid history of achievement in the youth development programs and initiatives on matters of political governance. He is also currently the executive director of an African youth leadership initiative called Be Relevant Leadership, and also he's a COMESA Youth Ambassador, as well as an ambassador for the First Lady of Zambia, Ms. Esther Lungu, in her campaign to eradicate early marriages. We also have our seventh speaker, who is Fumba Chama, popularly known as Pilato, who will be joining us later on this panel. Cherished viewers and distinguished speakers, we're going to pause here to watch the launch of the Global Peace at the UN headquarters, which was done in 2018 by Her Excellency Mrs. Graça Machel, the Chair of Global Peace. When we come back, we're going to give a short break so that our convener can give us more details on what Global Peace is.
25 years ago, an African institution, ACCORD, was established to contribute to resolving Africa's conflict so as to create the conditions for human security, economic prosperity, and social cohesion. Today, after working on almost all of Africa's protracted conflicts, we know that working towards peace alone will not deliver this. Peace, together with governance and development, is the only approach that can ensure stability. Therefore, in July of this year, the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, and ACCORD launched a new initiative called Global Peace to take ACCORD's experience from Africa and the Global South and extend our solidarity across the world. Global Peace will make a modest contribution in transforming how nations drive development and stability. It will promote an ecosystem of innovators, influencers, investors, and implementers to generate innovative solutions to challenges of our time. This civil society initiative will complement the efforts of governments and multilateral agencies and strengthen multilateralism.
Thank you so much. I'll now hand over the podium to Mr. Barrington Chungulo so that he can give us a brief history and more details on what Global Peace is.
Distinguished speakers and our cherished viewers, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you. Let me also express my dearest gratitude to Global Peace for giving me this opportunity. I am very delighted to be part of this global initiative. Global Peace was launched in 2018 by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Mrs. Graça Machel, Chair of Global Peace, at the BRICS Summit luncheon hosted for 17 heads of state. Later that same year in 2018, Global Peace was introduced to the global community during the Nelson Mandela Peace Summit at the UN General Assembly. In 2019, Global Peace set a goal of hosting 100 intergenerational dialogues in 100 cities across the world to commemorate the 75 years of the United Nations, where young people would dialogue with decision makers on the challenges we face and their aspirations for what a better world should look like. The intergenerational dialogues were officially launched in the city of Accra on 6th May 2019 by the co-chair of the United Nations Standard Development Goals Advocates and President of Ghana, His Excellency Nana-Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and Mrs. Graça Machel as the chair of Global Peace. And a few days after the launch was appointed member of the 2019 Standard Development Goals Advocates by the UN Secretary General. To date, we have organized 32 intergenerational dialogues, and these dialogues have taken place with the help of many of you who want to help the future of the world. We still have more work to do today, more than ever before, to achieve this goal. We want Global Peace to become a global movement committed to finding innovative solutions to the challenges facing the world and taking action to create lasting peace. The vision of Global Peace is to be a catalyst for collaborative efforts that create social compacts between governments, multilateral agencies, the private sector, and civil society towards generating innovative solutions to ongoing challenges to peace and development. Working through young people across the world and key stakeholders, Global Peace will become an ecosystem for ideas, innovators, influencers, investors, and implementers to find practical solutions to global challenges, enhancing conflict prevention and strengthening the global multilateral system. Global Peace, an initiative of ACCORD, is coordinated by a secretariat based in Durban, South Africa. ACORD is a civil society organization with 27 years of experience working closely with the UN, African Union, regional economic communities to mitigate conflict. ACORD has influenced police, trained almost 20,000 individuals in Africa, and assisted in the mediation of almost all of Africa's protracted conflicts. In continuing our work to mitigate conflicts in Africa, our experience reflects that peace is not merely the absence of war, but it is also the absence of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Global peace is the catalyst for collaborative efforts from the mitigation of conflicts to addressing the root causes of conflict. We also encourage young people to establish chapters of global peace in their countries to serve as platforms to advance shared value, social compacts between their governments, private sector, and civil society at a local and national level towards achieving the standard development goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chungulo, for that. So the purpose to convene the Global Peace Forum is for thinkers and also thought leaders and innovators in peace and development from government, the private sector, and the civil society, including the academia, to focus on innovative, creative approaches to conflict prevention and development. So we are going to take a break to watch a short, wonderful video on how a girl feels about the world today and how she hopes to live in a better world.
I've been thinking, in 10 years' time, I'll be 20, and I might be in love. If I'm lucky, I'll be learning, keep the wheels turning, even drive my own car. In 10 years' time, I may live with room to move, running water, a roof above my head. I may be struggling to make ends meet, to buy milk and bread and those little pink sweets. I don't know about the leaders I'll have to follow, the rules they'll put in place. What will become of my human race? Do I also have to worry about the world you're leaving for me?
Welcome back, everyone. So we'll now proceed with the dialogue. I'll urge all the speakers to mute their mics, but still leave their cameras on. So our first question will be to Dr. Mutale. I know we are now having our peace dialogue using a webinar. On a normal typical day, on this particular day of June 3rd, would have been having this dialogue in person, but because of COVID, we are living the new normal now that we are connecting with the world more globally using technology. So I just want to hear from you what you think the international community should prioritize for us to recover better from the pandemic.
Yeah, the COVID-19 has disturbed so many things that when it just was announced, it put the whole world on a standstill and left everybody confused. All governments didn't know how to react or what to do. No one was prepared for it. And so even all the citizens of the world were just as confused. As we have gone along, we keep up to today receiving so many conflicting messages and informations and how to handle the COVID-19 and also the solutions to it. We are told about a certain vaccine, then we are told about a certain vitamin, and then again we are told about a certain remedy that might be able to help the COVID-19. But for me, what stands out is that we now live in a globalized world and the whole world has become one. That when a butterfly flaps its wings in the Amazon, the effect is felt all around the world. So with the COVID-19, in my belief, in my opinion, the only way to resolve this is for all governments to come together, put their efforts and their minds and their heads together, as well as their, their money, their budgets. Because even if, for example, the most highly developed economies were able to kind of believe that they have eradicated COVID-19 in their countries, the fact that we are a globalized world and we are moving about all the time, this is bound to bounce back to those countries that would believe that they have spent a good budget on eliminating the virus in their own country. But if they leave other countries, for example, the poorer countries that are unable to afford to put an eco budget to fighting the COVID-19, it's also bound to come back. I'll give an example. For example, Africa feeds the world with all its natural resources, it builds the world and sustains the world economy. So if Africa were left by itself, if individual African governments or leaders were left by themselves to resolve those matters with just the little budgets that they have, it does not help the world, because the world will still have to travel into Africa to trade with Africa in order to keep the economy of the world running. And that means that whoever is going to travel to a country that still has COVID-19 running through those populations is bound to bring it back to those to his own country of origin. Or so for me, the best thing is for the whole world to come together as one, put their efforts together, put our resources together, and find one common solution to totally eradicate COVID-19 from the face of the earth.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mutale. I think I like your point on where you say everybody needs to come together and just have one solution. So yes. Our next question will go to Mr. Munshya and Dumisani as well. So in 2045, the UN will be turning 100 years, and there have been so many, goals that have been set, SDG, several documentations and declarations made at either global level, continental level, and country level. So I just want to hear from you if you think people in 2045 will be better off or worse off than we are today.
Hello, thanks Musonda, and thanks a lot for this opportunity to be able to participate in this seminar and dialogue. By about 2045, the United Nations will be turning 100 years. I'm very optimistic that by 2045, the United Nations will have achieved most of its goals that it has set for itself. The challenge is still there. But at least as far as the worst forms of poverty are concerned, we have seen some movement in that area. Even if an argument can be made that in actual fact, the improvement in terms of eradication of poverty has only happened in 2 countries, meaning India and China. But I'm very optimistic that using the same models that have worked for India and China, Africa as well can be pulled up from extreme forms of poverty, and so can Latin America. And so I'm quite optimistic that by 2045, we will be a much more prosperous world, and we are going to be a much more peaceful world. At the moment, there is definitely a clear challenge with the rise of some forms of fascism and nationalism around the world. But I think that this is just temporary. I think in a few years, we are going to continue fighting it, and we are going to come out of the other side much more successful as far as the rise of nationalist tendencies and fascism is concerned. And so by 2045, I'm very optimistic that we are going to have a better world, peaceful world, a much more prosperous world. The hard work, however, still remains. This is not a destination. This is a journey. That's why all the young people of the world, the young people in Zambia, must continue working together and working hard for that peace to be achieved by 2045.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munshya. I'll ask the same question to you, Dumisani. Do you think by 2045, will we see a worse kind of situation or a better way of living as compared to now?
Well, Mr. Munshya has actually spoken well and has actually shared my mind I'm a believer in a bright future. And as I always say, the future is bright. So provided our mindset is set to achieve it, then certainly we are going to achieve that. We may be looking at it from the global perspective, but what I would also, encourage us to look at the same issue at national level. And this can be achieved by, take for instance, having and implementing national development plans. Like take for instance, in our Zambian setup, we have the 7th National Development Plan that aims at delivering a socio-economic development to Zambia. And over and above that, we also have, the African Union Agenda 2063 that aims to deliver on the goal for inclusive and sustainable development. So if we are to implement these national plans and continental plans, I strongly believe that globally, what we are looking at really will be achieved by 2045.
Okay, thank you so much, Dumisani. I'll pass the same question to you, Bertha, but for you, I know in my introduction and the people that you work with, we know that you are an adolescent sexual reproductive health activist. I just want to hear your take, what you think or are looking forward to when the UN turns 100 in 2045.
Okay, so I'm also very optimistic. I really think we are going to be somewhere better than where we are today. And so what I would like to see for the young people and for every citizen of the world in the year 2045 is each one of us should have, universal health coverage should be made a reality. Then to me, that would have been a success because you're only as productive as healthy you are. So for all these other developments in other sectors that we need to ensure that health coverage gets to all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Bertha. This goes to you, Dr. Mutale. I think Mr. Munshya talked about the process to development. And I know you understand the process of development because I've seen you sit on platforms with leaders to discuss this issue. What are leaders doing today to deal with inequality and unemployment?
Inequality comes in so many forms. We have political inequality all around the world and even within individual countries. We also have inequality, social inequality. We have economic inequality where some people are so much richer than others. There's also the issue of gender inequality, which is really at my heart. But what world leaders are doing with that, as Dumisani has already mentioned, the Sustainable Development Goals, of which one of those goals is to achieve equality in the world by the year 2030. And also Africa has its own development agenda, which is the African Union Agenda 2063. In there as well, we are hoping for to achieve equality in the world. And social equality, for example, most countries have been trying to do this through the provision of education for all, in order to achieve upward social mobility. With the education, an educated person will always move out of their circumstances if they do use that education properly. So it gives you a step on the ladder to affluence, or let's say prosperity or development. So education has also been highlighted in the Sustainable Development Goals as well as in the African Agenda 2063. So those are some of the things that the governments are doing. In the Sustainable Development, at the core of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women. And in fact, gender equality cuts across all the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. So until the world can achieve gender equality, none of those 17 goals will ever be achieved. For example, the Millennium Development Goals that were set at the beginning of the millennium in the year 2000 also had at their core the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women, of which by the conclusion of the Millennium Development Goals in 2015, the world had not achieved that. No country in the world had achieved that. So now we've moved to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are still fighting for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. To some aspect, once the gender equality and empowerment of women and girls is achieved, then we know that the world can achieve equality and the prosperity that is required, because women always carry their children, their family, their community, their nation, and their world together with them in whatever state their country, their personal achievements are. For example, a child born of a rich woman will automatically lead an affluent life. A child born of an educated woman will automatically get the education that is desired. So then there will be no one left behind as aspired by the United Nations or even the African Union. Should we achieve the gender equality, then everything else will naturally fall into place. The political inequality, the economic inequality, the social inequality, equality of opportunities, all of those should be able to come together. So yes, countries and heads of governments and leaders are trying to work on achieving this equality through the Sustainable Development Goals, the African Union Agenda 2063, and all the other continental, national, and regional initiatives aimed at achieving equality.
Thank you so much for that insight. I'll come to you, Mr. Munshya. You are among the many with a unique story of how you have managed against all odds to be a person that you used to look up to, including myself. So given your experience, how do we ensure that young people not join the millions of those who are unemployed, either from a global perspective, an African perspective, a Zambian perspective as well, and just from even a Canadian perspective?
Thank you very much. Now, that's definitely a very tough question to deal with, particularly that the world is so, as Dr. Mutale has mentioned, there are so many inequalities. And so it's very difficult to compare a youth growing up in Chikwanda, where I grew up, to a youth growing up in Highland Park in Calgary, where my children are growing up. It's very difficult to make the comparisons. And so sometimes it's also challenging to come up with solutions that are going to cut across the board. What do my children need here in Calgary? Is it the same as I needed when I was trying to make ends meet in Chikwanda? And there is always this thing that we, for example, who grew up in Chikwanda, want to tell our children that are growing up in the West and in a much more affluent society. And we look at food, for example, and we tell them, look, do not waste this food. You eat this food, because there are so many people around the world that will do everything to try and have the kind of food that you have access to. The same issues with education. I tell my children, you have the world's best education institutions. You have the world's best schools, the world's best curriculum. There are so many children that I grew up with who would do everything to try and have access to some of the things that you have here. And so there is always that challenge, and we are always going to struggle with trying to compromise to negotiate between all these different realities. And some of us that grew up in Zambia and then have a feel of the Western world, and I know Dr. Mutale has had more experiences with several other cultures. It's always the challenge to see how we can look at all these cultures and see what are the principles that cut across. One of the things that I find to be very, very helpful for every youth around the world is to be optimistic, about their own personal future and the future of others. The second thing, apart from optimism,
It's this desire to connect with others. Now, with the social media, we have taken pen post to a whole different level. We can learn about how others are living far much more quicker now than we ever did decades ago. And so the youth around the world, they need to be optimistic, but also they need to feel a sense of connection and solidarity with other youth. Children that are growing up here, the youth that are here in Canada, they need to in fact feel duty-bound to try and connect with the youth of developing nations, or with the nations that are not as affluent and they are coming up. Through that solidarity of young people, we are going to assure for ourselves a better world, and for our children a more prosperous future. And so optimism, and then solidarity with one another, connection, that sense of connection, it's very important. The other thing is ensuring that once you have opportunities, you take advantage of them. School does bring a lot of opportunity, but even when you mention school as an opportunity, I'm very aware of several people that I grew up with, and they did not make it to grade 7, they did not make it to grade 9, just because they were women, they were girls. And so that we must deal with it and ensure that society and the youth and the world in which we are living in is much more fairer to everybody, boys and girls. Those, I think, are some of the things that we can look at in order for the youths around the world to feel like they are together, they are working hard, and they are dealing with issues that affect their development. And some of these things are systemic, right? Things like gender. That's why all the civil society organizations, governments that are taking an interest in addressing issues of gender are important in our society, because no matter how optimistic you are, if there is a systemic barrier to your development, there is very little that can be done. For example, I need to give an example of the Tanzanian situation, where the government there decided that girls who fall pregnant cannot advance in school. Now, I know that most of you are quite diplomatic about how you address such issues. Unfortunately, I've not been blessed with so much diplomacy when addressing things that happen in that manner, because I have personally seen how such policies negatively impact women and girls. And so we can't tolerate that. We cannot say that, no, it's okay, Tanzania is free to do whatever it has to do. We must speak up and say the government of Tanzania should reverse such policies and not punish young girls just for the simple reason that they are girls and they can have babies.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sure, Bertha, you can go ahead.
Okay, I really like what Mr. Elias brought up, optimism. And then with young people, being optimistic is a personal choice. So you cannot be optimistic over something that you do not know. So the other thing that young people need to do to ensure that they're active key players in development and they are riding in the race of development themselves, they need to make sure they have an identity. So there is no way you're going to claim to be this and want to speak for that. So you need, as a young person, you need to have a firm ground to stand on, a firm foundation from where your optimism will be born from. Mr. Elias also talked about the sense of connection. You also need to have a sense of ownership as a young person. You cannot feel connected to something if you do not own it. You cannot work hard to achieve something if you do not own it. So a sense of ownership is also just as important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertha, for that addition. My next question goes to you, Mr. Dumisani. My Bemba and Tonga doesn't allow me to pronounce the last name correctly, so I'll try and stick to Dumisani. So definitely applaud your journey through being an entrepreneur, particularly in Zambia, and also your story is one that a lot of youths admire. So I just want to hear from you, how can a young person become an entrepreneur so that they're able to build their livelihood and also contribute to their country? Because we've seen most of the type of entrepreneurial activities that youth do, they kind of struggle to see how they will, as a foundation, but how can they now contribute to a country?
All right, thank you so much, Musonda. As I get to that, I should indicate to say entrepreneurship is key. I'm a firm believer in entrepreneurship. And when Dr. Mutale was actually talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, which actually took over from the Millennium Development Goals, you realize that a number of goals that we have, like, no poverty, quality education, in industry innovation and infrastructure, sustainable, responsible consumption and production, all these things to some extent would fall under, in entrepreneurship to some extent, a very enterprising society. Being a firm believer in entrepreneurship and also looking at how entrepreneurship has actually impacted my life, I would really wish to see many more youths, especially Zambian and African youths, engage in entrepreneurship. Why? I believe that is one of the easiest ways we are going to have, sustainable development in Africa and in our countries. You see, if I'm to give an example of Zambia, back in the days when our parents said, go to school, get a job and become successful, to some extent, they were right. Because in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, when one graduated, a job was already waiting for them. Why? Because Zambia had two universities, the University of Zambia and the Copperbelt University. So if one graduated, a job was already waiting for them. But now you see 26, 27 years later, Zambia has 68 registered universities. And that is over and above the advent of online education. So now getting a job has become extremely difficult. In fact, you realize that even courses that guaranteed one getting a job, take for instance, education. If one qualified as a teacher around 2000 in Zambia, you'd be posted by the government almost instantly. But now in 2018, 54,000 applied and only 2,000 were picked. Then later on, 27,000 applied and only 2,009 were picked. Now, what does that say? One who graduates in education now with a degree in education might have to wait for at least 20 years before they are posted by the government. And you might think, well, maybe that is just education. Let me tell you that from 2018, when we had 300 lawyers called to the bar, getting a job as a lawyer in Zambia has become very, very, very difficult. Lawyers that have been called to the bar, qualified with under Ziali, would actually be getting a 1,500 kwacha, which is like $100 a month. That is how bad things are. Maybe you might think that is just for lawyers. Let me give you the creme de la creme. In our education system, the people that we respect the most are the medical doctors. But I'll tell you for a fact that the medical doctors that qualified in December 2018 in Zambia up to now, 2020, have not yet been posted. Now, that tells you something. What that tells you is that, you see, getting jobs has become extremely difficult. And that is why we need now to begin thinking of engaging in entrepreneurship. I've just given the Zambian perspective, but the story is the same across Africa. We have about 10 million graduates, but the job market absorbs less than 5 million. Now that should tell you that, see, the challenges you are facing across Africa are the same, and the deficit keeps growing. If you look at the sub-Saharan region, we have a population of 603 million. But the people that are enterprising and people that can employ are just 1.5%. Now that gets to tell us that, you see, there is serious need for a number of us to begin thinking of entrepreneurship as a way for sustainable development. And, you know, having said that, some of the things that now we should then begin thinking of are things to see on how we can change, you know, the focus of our education system. So if you are looking at, you know, sustainable development across Africa and globally, we need now to begin thinking of how we can change the quality of our education system. It should not push us towards thinking of getting a job after qualifications, thinking of getting employed once you have graduated. We should now begin thinking of how we can monetize our skills. So there is a serious need for a mindset change. And you realize that, you see, when people are poor, when we are not utilizing our skills, when people are underprivileged financially, these are people that threaten peace. So if you're talking of global peace, it may not be achieved if, you see, the inequality is quite massive. So there is need then to bridge this gap. There is need to then see how we can improve the skills of the youths and see how we can have them enterprise, because entrepreneurs spur innovation, they create employment, and they bring about development. So this is the area that I'm so passionate in, and I would wish to see African governments, you know, putting in so much to make sure that we have an enterprising population. And maybe just to put you to context, and maybe let me just bring it to our Zambian, you know, setup, so that you just get something why we need to have a number of us enterprising. The GDP of Zambia, is slightly above $25 billion. Now, you might think $25 billion is a lot. Well, it is, but if you look at a Chinese company like Huawei, their turnover is about $125 billion. And by the way, in simpler ways, the GDP is the value of goods and services produced in a country. So if we add everything that is produced in Zambia, it gives us $25 billion. Then Huawei, when they make their sales annually, they make more than $125 billion. What that means is that, you see, as a country, we enter in Huawei 5 times with change. That is how small we are. Now, the only way we can grow this is if we had, you know, many more people begin enterprising. Maybe let me move from the GDP because people talk more of the GDP, but I want to share something with you, which is called the GNP, which is the gross national product. Now, this is the value of goods and services produced by the citizens of the country. Now, just to put you to context, the GNP of the United States is more than the GDP by $250 billion. Now, how is that possible? It is possible because what is produced in the United States is less than what is produced by the citizens of the United States. How is that possible? It is possible because the citizens of the United States have companies across the globe. So when we add that value, you find that their GNP is more than the GDP by $250 billion. But the question is, what is the GNP of Zambia? Now, it might interest you to note that our GNP is so small, so insignificant, such that we have no records of our GNP. Why? We don't own the mines, we don't own the banks, we own nothing except NRCs. Now, what does this tell us? This is the story across many African countries. So I would wish to see how we can encourage our citizens, our citizenry to begin enterprising to curb the challenges that we are facing. Musonda, your microphone is muted.
Just to build up on, the topic that you have raised on the education system not, being adequate. I just want to hear your thoughts, a build up, Mr. Munshya, on how there has so much been a lot of literature which Dumisani has echoed on how the education system does not prepare the young person out there. I just want to hear your thoughts and how this can either be changed or a few tactics and strategies that the government can use in order for us to reach to a point where Dumisani gave a reference of US and other countries that have managed to be able to tune the education system to meet the needs of the youth towards entrepreneurship.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Ncube, for that elaborate expose. And thanks for teaching me. I'm going to speak with a focus on at least two fields, and also I'll deal with an attitude issue. The first one is, in Zambia, for example, there are so many, and like Mr. Ncube has mentioned, right now, Zambia has so many lawyers that are unemployed or underemployed. And when you go to the rules that govern the Law Association of Zambia, a Zambian lawyer cannot freely be an entrepreneur to provide legal services. Now, that is a very big issue. So you have so many lawyers, but they can't be entrepreneurial. They can't start their own companies. And if they have to provide legal services, they can't, at least for 3 years. Is it 3 to 5 years after their back home? And so what is needed with the new unemployed lawyers is to prevail upon the system so that the system becomes much more flexible to let them be able to provide the services. And through that, begin having companies, because that is very important. That then answers a very important question. Are Zambian lawyers willing to be entrepreneurs? Yes, they are. What is the barrier? It's a systemic barrier. It's a legal barrier. And what can they do about it? They need to revolt and talk openly about it. The legal system is no longer that cartel of 300 people. It has now grown, and it's growing to almost 2,000 lawyers. Most of them are younger. Most of them are having it as, like me, third or fourth career. It means then that there is a lot of room for innovation. What is needed is courage to try and say, hey, we want to be entrepreneurs. What is it that we can do for us to begin a Kantemba law firm somewhere in Mongo? If they can be paid $1,500 as a salary, honestly, they can set up shop in Mongo in order for them to begin providing legal services to the people of Mongo or to the people of Mansa. And through that, I think we are going to raise that national product. The other thing is we have, in some instances, for example, in Zambia, we have very limited appreciation for entrepreneurship in terms of other non-traditional fields like ministry and pastors. I do get this idea a lot, where most people come up and say, why should we have so many pastors, so many small churches? But we miss the point that those small churches are actually providing employment, and they are a very good economic engine for development. Because suddenly, these pastors are starting all these Tuntemba churches, and when they start those Tuntemba churches, they are income generating. They are providing salaries for the papa or for the prophet or for the preacher, and through that, all we need is to encourage such innovation, recognize it as an economy. whether you are taxing the people that are receiving, not taxing the churches, but taxing the salaries that these young, mostly young preachers are receiving, and continue doing that, but recognize it as an economic model. We need to think outside the box. Some people give me an example of Nigeria. One of the issues that are raising a lot of forex for the Nigerian economy is religion. Be it all these profita churches and all the pilgrimages that Africans are doing going to Nigeria. Of course, there is always an argument about the religious efficacy of all those activities. But one thing cannot be denied, that religion is one of the sources of forex for Nigeria. We can do the same and recognize this as an important industry. And so we need to begin thinking outside the box. We need to begin recognizing sectors that have not been recognized up to now. The other thing is, every school curriculum in Zambia must begin including entrepreneurship. How can we begin working? How can we budget? How can we do financing? One of the complaints that most financiers have in Zambia is that there is a very bad culture of debt and paying back. Some people pump money into businesses and they never see it growing or coming back. We need training about that. And I think that is going to be very helpful. There is a lot of flexibility now that has started from the legal front, be it village banking, for example. A few years ago, village banking was illegal. And in fact, when you look strictly at Zambian banking laws, village banking ought not to exist. But because they saw that so many people were in it, and so they recognized it as a sector, and the Bank of Zambia said, okay, fine, you can go ahead and do it. And so we need to begin thinking outside the box. We need to begin encouraging sectors that we have thought are not viable enough and never thought of them as economic sectors, such as the Profita Papa church ministries, and recognize them as part of the economic sector, and recognize that entrepreneurship must be in every curriculum. When accountants are having their professional designations, we must include in there how they can set up their own shop. Doctors, the same. How can, in a country that has a serious doctor population shortage, Zambia has a shortage of doctors. What is so wrong with our education for doctors that they cannot set up shop on their own? What is it that we can do, be it to the way we regulate doctors, such that we can have them, fund them, help them out. If it's learning a little bit of business, they can go to seminars, they get a little bit of funding, they set up a clinic, and through that we see the development. The only sector that is overblown at the moment is the education sector, universities, 68 universities. And they're dishing out doctorates like you would ever know. Doctorates, master's degrees, bachelor's degrees. So there is an inflation in the qualifications. But more than just that, what we need is now to go back to running businesses, running companies, how to start schools, how to start medical practices, how to start legal practices, and deal with all these barriers that exist at law.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munshya, for that. I'll pose my next question to Ms. Chulu in terms of, having focused on your activism and civic engagement, and how you think particularly the issue of, sexual reproductive health, which has not received a lot of attention, and just making the young people in Zambia made aware. Do you think the future is bright in terms of ensuring that the rights of adolescent girls are amplified? And also, what do you think leaders should be doing in order to either amplify or kind of just motivate and ensure that these rights are actually met based on the several declarations that have been made at continental, national, and global level?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I won't dwell so further away from what Mr. Munshya said. I really think what leaders can do at this moment to ensure that everything goes as planned is, we are not short for very good documents, very good policies, but we need to structure up policies that are responsive to the needs of people. And in sexual reproductive health and rights, we're talking about particularly young people. So we need to redefine and restructure what we can restructure, especially the education system. This is what leaders can do for us to ensure that we move forward. So the current education system is more theoretical than is practical. So we need to ensure that even the education that our young people are getting is responsive to the needs of the dynamic society at that particular time. What was the other question about sexual reproductive health and rights? Sorry. Oh, your mic is muted.
Sorry, I think I was also trying to have you kind of share what leaders, the strategies that leaders need to bring up in order to ensure that the rights of sexual reproductive health is amplified and every girl, either in Lusaka, Chipata, where you're doing your advocacy with, and globally are echoed.
Okay, thank you. So the other thing is we really need to normalize sexual reproductive health and rights. I don't know on the panel how many of us are comfortable to talk about sex with people from the different generation from us. By show of hand, I'll be able to say it. Dr. Justina, are you comfortable? Mr. Dumisani, we have a problem. Okay, so it starts with us. We need to be able to have conversation concerning sexual reproductive health and rights. You would be wild to know that some things are still taboos in our homes. And so you expect us to have reduced numbers of teenage pregnancies and child marriages. How? If we are not talking about it, how? The first step is to talk about it. I believe the more you know about something, the easier it is to be creative around that thing. Even the way to fight the problems that comes with that thing. For as long as you are well informed, it means your decision in that field will be well informed as well. So we need to break barriers between parents and young people, the government and the local young people. And we need to ensure that sexual reproductive health and rights is a household topic and everybody talks about it. Because if we're losing a lot of young girls to child marriages in the country, then you don't expect the gross domestic product to rise. You don't expect the gross national product to rise because we have lost 75%, I don't know how many percentages of young people to child marriages when we had a chance to fight it. So yes, if you are well informed, you can make a well-informed decision.
Thank you so much, Bertha. So we are joined by another speaker, Mr. Mwilah. Mwilah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Musonda.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. This question goes to you, Mwilah. Given the COVID-19, it has shown that, and as Bertha already echoed, it's shown that health has not really been prioritized. How do you think we can change this narrative, given your perspective from being a governance expert and also having had an opportunity to sit on platforms at continental level and also at international level?
Thank you so much. And first and foremost, apologies for coming in late. I was coming from Lusaka, coming home to Chungulo. One of the things I think we have all noticed is that during this particular pandemic, can you all get me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. One of the things that we have noticed during this particular pandemic is that many gaps have actually been noticed, and some of the main things that I really want to talk about is that one of the areas that we really have to start focusing on as a continent are three fundamental areas. I know that our health system hasn't been striving as it should be striving, but one of the fundamental areas we have to start focusing on as a continent are the aspect of industrialization. Secondly, the aspect of trying by all means to bridge the digital divide that exists in our continent. And thirdly, trying by all means to see how we can also, work on our health systems that are, as regards the question that was earlier on posed. Why do I talk about the importance of industrialization? During this particular lockdown, we have all seen how it becomes important for countries to begin depending, within the boundaries of their own selves, because countries that have consistently been dependent on exports and exports and exports. During this particular pandemic, we have all seen, why it is important for all of us to prioritize the importance of industrialization and domestic production. And even as we talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which I'm certain that Justina Mutale knows about. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement seeks to bring about, the importance of intra-trade amongst us as a continent. But if we do not have domestic production and industrialization happening in our own continent and amongst ourselves, it becomes very difficult to trade, amongst ourselves in one way or the other. And then when we come to the aspect of trying to bridge the digital divide, what we have also noticed during this particular pandemic is that everyone has turned to internet. Everyone has turned to the internet. We're having this amazing discussion right now digitally, isn't it? And we are all coming from different worlds in one way or the other. But there are many people across the African continent and across the nation as well who don't have this privilege that we're having right now. So it is important and mandatory for us to start looking into the issue of bridging the digital divide and seeing how best we can achieve, universal internet access in post-COVID-19. And many research, I think in 2019, the World Bank published a report that we need approximately $100 billion in order for us to bridge the digital divide. And I think it's possible, with African solidarity and working together as one. I believe it can be done. Taking into consideration that by the year 2030, we want to make sure that the whole entire continent, is connected. I believe 2030 is even way far-fetched. We need to start, working as hard as we can right now. Why have I talked about all these other areas? The only way that we can cement our health system as a continent is when we have the ability to be self-sustaining within the boundaries of our own self. When we show to the international world that indeed as a continent, indeed as a country, we have what it takes to drive our economy, we have what it takes to be as transparent as possible, we have what it takes to promote the importance of democracy and governance structures, we have what it takes to drive the agendas of our own nation, and we have what it takes to also fight corruption. Only then can we also achieve, the aspect of universal health coverage in one way or the other.
Thank you so much, Mwilah, for that input. I like the point that you raised on African free trade, and I think Dr. Mutale also, I saw you had a lot of views on the African, Africa free trade. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Mutale?
Sorry about that. Yeah, like Mwilah said, I echo what he just said, why it is important to be self-reliant as a country and also as a continent. Africa in itself, among its 54 countries, has enough. They can become one of the biggest economies in the world if we became as one economy and just trade within one another. We have everything that the rest of the world needs to run, and we are always giving all these, we are always building the economies of other parts of the world and neglecting our own. So if we opened up the Africa Intercontinental Free Trade Area, all the money would be circulating within the economies of the African continent. It doesn't have to leave Africa. Then Africa would not be as poor as it is considered to be now. We are the richest continent in the world, and we build the world. We provide everything that the world needs to use. For example, now in this digital age, as we all know, we are now using a computer. Some of us are using the phone. In order for the phone or the computer to run, we need an element that is called coltan, which is mined in the Congo. About 70 to 80% of that is mined in the Congo. but we feed the rest of the world with that, so much so that the rest of the world is so way advanced in technology than we are in Africa, and yet we are the ones that produce that element. We've been talking about electric cars. We have the cobalt, which is also produced in Zambia, but again in Congo in very huge amount, in the highest level that the world require in order to build these electric cars. So if we can just open up the Africa Intercontinental Free Trade Area, and Africa can be trading among themselves, then we have a chance of the economies of Africa to rise. Having said that, at the beginning of the millennium, African economies had been rising. Hence, we had the term Africa Rising. Because of the 10 highest growing economies in the world, 6 of those had always stayed in Africa since the year 2000. It's such a shame that the COVID-19 has come and disturbed that. But still, there's an opportunity, as Mwilah has said. This is the time when we need to think within ourselves. How do we develop ourselves without needing the outside world? How can Africa develop itself without depending on the outside world? And just to say that up to about in 2015 alone, $203 billion left Africa through the back door, through tax dodging, through capital flight. And this is against only put together aid, loans, and diaspora remittances, which only came to about 103. So you can see that if all the money, the tax that is dodged by multinationals out of Africa and goes out of Africa, taken out of Africa through backdoor, can stay within Africa by us depending on ourselves and trading within ourselves and not having to need those multinationals to come in and steal all this money at the back. This is the amounts of money that can recirculate in our economies to pay for our health sector, so to and also to pay for the education of our children. Of course, it would alleviate a lot of the poverty that is happening in Africa at the moment. But these are some of the things that we do not look at as Africans. But there are things we really need to look deeper in what causes the problems that we have in Africa. In 2013, when the UK was holding the presidency for the G8, I was appointed as diaspora ambassador and spokesperson for what we called Enough Food for Everyone If campaign. And this was enough, if everyone had enough food, there's enough food to go around in the world, if only we could do these things. And we had 4 asks. These were to look at, to try and lobby the G8 to revisit and revise 4 of the most important policies that we believe that accelerated hunger around the world and also in Africa. And this included the highest one was tax dodging. As I have said, you can imagine $203 billion stolen out of Africa through tax dodging. We also looked at corruption. We looked at transparency. Of course, we looked at aid, but aid is only 1/5 of the amount of money that is taken out of Africa. So if Africa can fight, for example, to try and lock up those loopholes that allow the multinationals to take out so much money out of the continent, and of course, this would happen if we started to trade among ourselves. Then we wouldn't need that many multinationals to come in and try to run our trade for us. So the Africa Free Trade, Intercontinental Free Trade Area is very important for the development, economic development, but also even the social and political development of Africa, because then there'll be no need for us to be having all these people to come and monitor our elections and, imposing standards that they want to us, whether it's one Western world wanting us to follow their way of democracy, or whether it's China for us to follow their way of living, because we would be dependent on ourselves and we call the shots ourselves. So that is why it's important if we can open the Africa Free Trade Area. Of course, there's been some resistance because put together with all the richness that we have in Africa, there are a few countries that are much richer than others. For example, about 3 countries donate 50% of the GDP of Africa, and then we have about 6 of the lowest countries who only contribute 1%. So there's that thing of fighting of how do we put together. But when you come back and think of the African philosophy of Ubuntu, perhaps that's where Africa needs to go back to see that we are all one people and we need to get together. And in order for us to develop, we need to hold each other's hands as one continent, as one place, as one people, as Africa, in order for us to rise above what the rest of the world is trying to do onto Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mutale, for that insight. For the listeners, if you have any questions for the panelists or anything you're curious about that you'd like the speakers to address, please use the Q&A option to ask the questions. So we have a question that was sent to us previously. I think most of you have heard about climate change and how this has impacted the African continent, a country also. And I'll pose this question to Dumisani, Mr. Ncube and Mr. Munshya on your thoughts on how, what countries need to do based on how climate change has impacted either young people. From Mr. Ncube's case, where we look at a situation, this is a young person who relies on agriculture, and that particular year, there's there's a bad rainfall, so it means they are not able to get a good yield as they would have produced on a day when they are relying on rainfall for good produce. What do you think are some of the incentives or strategies that the government needs to put up in order to cushion these young people who are affected by climate change in their journey as young entrepreneurs, and for them to also be able to contribute to the country's economy?
All right. Thank you so much, Musonda. You seem to have serious difficulty saying my name. The only person who's actually said my name rightly is Mr. Munshya. I don't know why. I'll need to know why. Okay. I think I will speak to what was obtaining earlier as I come to your question. The challenge that we have as Africa is that we are failing to trade amongst ourselves. It would interest you to note that as African countries, we deal more with other continents than we do amongst ourselves. If you look at intra-trade, trade amongst African countries, the total of, the trade that countries do, intra-trade in Africa is just about 16%. But if you look at, Europe, it is at 68%. Much of their trade is amongst themselves. So the only way we can develop our continent is if we saw and found means of how we can trade amongst ourselves. And you see, we have many difficult questions that we might really have to respond to. Getting a flight to go to Ghana is much more expensive than getting a flight to go to the UK. Moving on a flight from Ghana to a country like Togo, you might discover that it is actually much more expensive than getting on a flight going to the UK. Now, these are some of the challenges that we actually have as a continent. Now, how do we address these challenges, and how I wish our leaders could sit down and see how we can break the barriers that we have as a continent. Without improving on intra-trade, it will be extremely difficult to develop Africa. You see, our economies individually are too small. I just gave you an example to say, the GDP of Zambia is so small such that it enters, I don't know how many times, in companies that are in China. We are too small. And if you look at it collectively as Africa, our GDP is about $3 trillion. But maybe let me leave that one. I have so much to say around that, but let me get to your question. Your question is, what should we do now that climate change is here? The first part is, we need to accept. Acceptance is a starting point that climate change is here. It has come and it is now with us. We can plan on how to mitigate and control and see how we can, minimize the damage. But since it is already here, how should we then work going forward? Rainfall patterns have changed. In Zambia, not too long ago, the breadbasket of Zambia was in Southern Province. But now tables have changed. The rainfall pattern in Southern Province has become extremely bad. So food production has become really bad. Now, what should we do? What I would then propose is this. When God, well, from the biblical side, when God says, I'll give you the waters above and below. Now the waters above are giving issues. Now it is an issue of going to the waters below. Now, to go to the waters below, what should then the government do to help in terms of drilling boreholes, seeing how we can channel rivers to meet up with issues that can do with irrigation? Because now we cannot depend on rainfall for us to do massive agricultural produce. So it is an issue of seeing how else we can achieve this. We have rivers in Zambia, so it would be an issue of seeing how the government could then partner with the citizens to see how we can channel rivers to actually help mitigate and see how we can have agricultural produces done through the rivers and how we can drill boreholes and just see how we can then manage the new normal in this case, knowing that we cannot fully depend on rainfall. So if I'm to respond to your question in short, I would say we need then to see other alternative sources of water if it is in line with agriculture, and see how we can pick it up from there.
Thank you so much, Ncube. I will pass it on to Mr. Munshya, who's able to pronounce the name. Mr. Munshya, I just want to hear your thoughts, and this question will also be posed to you, Bertha, as well. Your thoughts, having had the opportunity to stay in Zambia, and now you have the opportunity to interact on an international level and understand these issues that have to do with climate change. What would be the comparison in what Zambia needs to do and the developed world in order for us to combat climate change?
I think one of the things that we really must work on is that to understand that this is our world, all of us. It belongs to us equally. And so we've got to partner with the rest of the world, nations coming together and working together. Now, that is what nations ought to do. But there is something that we as individuals as well must do. For example, we must engage in much more sustainable practices. What are these practices? Simple. How do we get rid of garbage and litter in our streets? What do we do about it? What are the community initiatives that we can bring together to see that we are disposing of our garbage in a much more friendly manner? I think Zambia had a leader who I think was ahead of his time in most cases. Now, I do have my own issues with Kenneth Kaunda, but one of the things that you learned very early on in your syllabus in primary school was issues about the environment. We were educated about the Chitemene system and how unsustainable it was. But even if there was a leader who did see that climate change was going to be an issue, I think there was a lack of translation of that value to where it is adopted by the citizens. And I think we missed a very huge opportunity as a nation to try and adapt our practices to accommodate and fight climate change. But we have the responsibility now. We need to begin looking at our practices. What is it that we are doing? Garbage, gardening, farming, all these issues, and water as well. What are we going to do about this? The other thing is, if the rain patterns has changed, where Southern Province, which was a breadbasket, now is receiving very little rain, and suddenly we have so much rain in Luapula among my people who are not very good at growing a lot of maize for others to consume. We only grow enough to feed ourselves and our children, but we do not think beyond growing more. So we need us, our people in Luapula and Northern, to realize that the rainfall now has come on our side, and we need to emulate how the Southern Province has been doing farming, and we adapt that. Those are the changes that we are going to be seeing going forward, and those are the changes that we must encourage. The other thing is Africa's fundamental problem. Now, I'm aware that we have so many ways to look at Africa's problems. For me, I think Africa's fundamental problem is addressed in what I call post-Africanism, which is a slightly different way of looking at African issues than Pan-Africanism. You see, the problem with Pan-Africanism is we said that we became independent as a continent. But in actual fact, we perpetuated the same colonial structure. So after 1964, after the independence of Africa, after the establishment of the African Union, we still continued the colonial template. And that is the template where we've been working around. What is this template? For example, it's very easy to say what we need is intra-Africa trade. That sounds very nice and very good. However, what is intra-Africa trade? It is simply the ability of a Luapulan to sell maize to a people in Katanga. And that is what it really means. But in order for you to sell your products to Katanga, the first barrier that you face, before you even face a legal barrier, you face the barrier of attitude. This idea that somehow some people in Zambia do not feel like they have any connection whatsoever with their friends across the border, which is pretty sad. We need to dismantle those mentalities in order for us to be able to practice intra-Africa trade, so that the small entrepreneurs that are able to produce munkoyo in Chirilabombwe can freely sell that munkoyo to their colleagues across the border. Then we are going to begin realizing the intra-Africa trade. The love not only for an understanding of Zambia as a country that is independent of the others, but an understanding that we Zambians have a connection with those people around us. And when we are thinking about trade, we must openly think about the trade with the other, with the Katangese, with the Angolans, with the Malawans, with the Zimbabweans, with everyone around us.
Great, so I take it up from there. This is a very insightful discussion, and the problems and solutions we seem to be bringing about somehow might seem independent to other people, but they are closely interlinked. And so I have just realized there is no way we are going to want to thrive in another field and leave out another field, just a case of climate change. So from the sexual reproductive point of view, I'm going to link climate change and sexual reproductive health and rights. So here's a scenario. In the rural parts of Zambia, I come from Chipata. I'm in Chipata right now. In the rural parts around this area, the most prominent, dominant business that people are doing around here is charcoal burning. Well, because we have issues of load shedding and because, everything else. So people are cutting down trees to burn charcoal, but that is their way to earn income in order to sustain themselves. So look at a mother. In sexual reproductive health, there is a concept of contraceptives. Look at how we Africans are giving birth to each other uncontrollably. And then at the same time, there are no feasible economic activities to sustain our families. And so we end up driving to charcoal burning as a way of earning income in order to thrive in every other field of our lives. So if we want to sort issues of climate change, it has to be a holistic approach. Mr. Ncube, I can brag, I can also pronounce your name. I hope I did it right. Earlier talked about the 7th National Development Plan. So the 7th National Development Plan, like I said earlier, we are not short for good policies and documents, but implementation is an issue. It speaks highly to the integrative approach that we need to use in order to develop our nation. But if we're going to leave out one part and try to move with another part, then we are definitely not going anywhere. So like I'm saying, they might seem independent, but closely are interlinked. So that is how in sexual reproductive health and rights, if we are not concentrating on the issue of giving contraceptives to mothers, and if we're not fighting child marriages and teenage pregnancies, that means we'll keep birthing ourselves. And because there is no any other economic activities that we can do around here, we'll keep cutting down trees. And because we keep cutting down trees, we'll keep burning and eating up our ozone layer. And hey, climate change. So we can't solve a problem by creating another problem. We need to have holistic, realistic solutions to these problems that we are having. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertha. My next question goes to you, Mr. Mwilah Bwanga. And the message, the question is coming from Bright Chishala. And the question reads, how can we put this mindset in our African brothers and sisters, seeing that most of the people here do not understand just how wealthy Africa is?
First and foremost, allow me to say that changing the narrative is very possible, but it also depends on how we tell our story as Africa. If we read the declaration of the Agenda 2063, one of the things that we read is that I love a statement that goes on to say that we echo the Pan-African core that Africa must unite in order to achieve its renaissance. And those words are deeper than they can go in one way or the other. So there's unity of purpose that is needed amongst our leaders. I'll be blunt and honest about that. In order for us to change the mindset of our African brothers and sisters, there's unity of purpose that our leaders must begin to preach, in the 21st century. I love a gentleman, by the name of Thomas Sankara, who had to change the name of his country to Burkina Faso, which means the land of incorruptible people. What he was trying to inculcate in his people is to say, you know what, we were once in bondage, but we now have the freedom and we now have what it takes in order for us to architect the future that we so desire for ourselves. So changing the mindset of our brothers and sisters, where we begin to realize that we are rich within the boundaries of our own selves, it really takes our leaders to begin preaching such a message. It really takes our education system to begin inculcating the patriotic spirit in many young people. And those are some of the things that I also talk about in my latest book, Decolonization. One thing I talk about is that in post-COVID-19, we are looking for a generation of patriotic young women and men, a generation of patriotic mothers and fathers that can begin to sound the trumpet that indeed we can be great. Just like Council Munshya also talked about, to say that it's one thing for us to have these holistic and imaginative ideas about intra-trade, about achieving the African Renaissance, about becoming an industrious continent. But at the end of the day, it also, we also have to take into consideration the kind of measures that we are putting in place in order to change the narrative and the mindset of our African brothers and sisters. Because there are many things right now that actually hold us in bondage as Africans. We can't work together in most cases. Most of the people I'm really found with are the Hindu community. And one thing I really appreciate about that community is that these people are really united. Talk about the Muslim community, in Zambia. These people are really united. They work together as one, which is not so common amongst ourselves as Africans. So there are many things already that we also have to start dealing with, as a people. But it also, it also begins on the aspect of how do we begin to change our narrative using media, using politics, using education, using provision of healthcare, using literally every system that we can come up with in order for us to change the narrative. And most importantly, Africans have to start writing their own story and begin to publish and sell out their own story, not just about having PhDs and not really adding anything to the table.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bwanga, for that. We also have, we acknowledge the questions from Mr. Sande Silungwe and also Mr. Mulimukwa Sindoi. Our panelists covered those questions while they were, our panelists answered the questions earlier. I just want to give this opportunity to the panelists if they have closing remarks, let's say in 1 minute or 30 seconds. Closing remarks. Anyone, we can start with you, Dr. Mutale, your closing remarks within 1 minute. Sorry, your mic is on mute.
I am delighted that we have had such a powerful panel. And I think that for Africa and the rest of the world to gain global peace, we need to take into consideration a lot of the things that our panelists have alluded to, including getting rid of, for example, poverty. When people feel that they are in poverty, they are bound to rise against the system. If there's inequality, people are bound to rise against the system, think that they are being hard done by. So everybody needs to be made to feel comfortable within what the system can accommodate. And I think that is very important. But also we need to have an educated populace, not as educated in a mind, but informed, well-informed, people that understand how the whole world works and how the system works and how do we get from where we are to where we need to be and what is encroaching on our development. Why can we, for example, I explained to you this tax dodging really does get to me when I think how much money is taking, how the multinationals literally take the food out of the mouths of the children of Africa with that money that's taken out, and that is legal. That is a legal loophole. It is not illegal. So then you think, who sets these kinds of laws? Who makes it legal that this should be done onto Africa in this way? So those are some of the things that we really need to be thinking about. And we need to be thinking about as Africans, as the new young African generation that are rising up to see how Africa can get its rightful piece of the pie in the world economy by understanding how the whole entire global system works, how the global governance system works, how the international system works, what the rules and laws, regulations, procedures, and processes that are in place, and fight against those in order to get Africa onto its rightful path and also to sustain the peace in the world. As we can see already, some of the wrongs that were done so many years ago, 400 years ago through slavery, we are still having those repercussions rising up in the Black Lives Matter today. So in order to secure the future of African generations to come, we need to lock this. We need to untie this and lock future loopholes that might disadvantage Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mutale. Mr. Munshya, your last thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chikwanda. It's been a pleasure to join you all in this discussion today. I have been taught, I have learned a lot, and also more than just learning a lot, I've caught on a very big passion, a passion for the world, a passion for Africa, a passion for Zambia, a passion for our people. Much, much appreciated. Let's keep doing what we are doing. sometimes it's very difficult to be encouraged, particularly when you look around and think, what, are we doing enough? I think the trajectory is right. The passion is where it needs to be. We need a little more encouragement. And to the youth of Zambia. Now, this is one of the most comical things I've ever thought of. In Zambia, at my age, I'm older than 70% of Zambians. In Canada, at my age, I'm in one of the youngest age brackets. So it goes to show the globalization of confusion, in the sense that one person who is older in one country is actually in the younger percentile in another country. Very, very confusing things. But anyway, we need to continue working hard, continue dreaming. That's very important. Africa is now globalized. Africa has gone global. And we do get questions about why are we away from Africa? We are away from Africa because indeed Africans are global, African issues are global, and African peoples themselves are global. And so we in the diaspora and those that are in the motherland can always coordinate, work together to see that we continue exchanging ideas about how Africa can move forward. We also need to begin exploring new ways of thinking for Africa. I am done with Pan-Africanism because for 100 years, it's not really yielded what we hoped it was going to yield. I'm now a post-Africanist in the sense that I now begin questioning the very foundation of the colonial African Union enterprise. And I'm trying to ask new questions to say, why haven't we interrogated the main issues that inform the Pan-Africanist movement? We need to interrogate it. We need to interrogate colonialism. We need to interrogate all those questions in order to birth for ourselves a new way of thinking, because that is where the issue is, a new way of thinking. How are we going to think differently about taxation? How are we going to think differently about intra-Africa trade? How are we going to think differently about our borders? Is as Africans going to revolt against the colonial borders, for example, to say, hey, we're going to build on no man's land? Are we going to interrogate those questions? Are we going to interrogate questions about citizenship, African citizenship? You know, are we going to be asking those deep questions about that? And so I think we are in the right path. I commend you all and thank you for inviting me to our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Munshya. Mr. Ncube, your closing remarks.
All right, thank you so much, Musonda. I'm so privileged to share a platform with these powerful gentlemen and women. I'll say this, the way forward that I believe would be key for us to move to the next level. We need to be hungry. Musonda, we need to be hungry. As Zambians, we need to be hungry. As a continent, we need to be hungry. Now, let me share this with you. I have this hunger. Where does this hunger come from? It comes from an experience that I had in 2015. So 2015, I got to France for the very first time at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Getting there, the immigration lady who was supposed to stamp my passport questioned, so where are you from? I said, Zambia. What are you here for? I said, I'm here for a business meeting. From which company? I said, DLN Technologies. Who are you there? I'm the CEO. Then from there, she looked at me with so much suspicion. Then she had all these many questions. Amongst the questions were, where are your bank statements? So I told her to say, well, I do not have the bank statements. Because before getting the visa, I submitted the bank statement. So I do not have them with me here. So she seemed to be adamant. So we ended up with a supervisor. Getting to the supervisor, they conversed in French. Then the supervisor questioned me for the same thing, said, where are the bank statements? So I told the supervisor, say, sir, you see, when you are at a university and you have an identity card with a student number, it is unreasonable for a lecturer in a lecture room to ask you for your acceptance letter, registration. It is unreasonable because it is expected that before you get a student number and an identity card, you should have gone through the process. So, sir, in Zambia, it takes 21 days, up to 21 days to get a visa coming here. So I do not have those things, but I have the visa here to show that I'm supposed to be here. Then the man said, well, we can put you in the next available flight to Zambia. So I told him, say, you see, you cannot deport me. Now, at that point, the feeling in my heart was that this is how Zambians are ill-treated, and this is how Africans are ill-treated. So I told him, say, you see, I'll sue you. We'll go to court. Now, at that point, I'd never gone to court to see the way we just threatened people to say, I'll sue you. So, but anyway, court papers are signed, and you are set to appear in court in 3 days' time. But because I could not be kept at the airport, I was taken to a Red Cross center. Now, going to the Red Cross center, I was moved in a vehicle that had policemen with guns, one vehicle behind, one vehicle in front with sirens. So I was kept to that side. On the third day, I appeared in court for the very first time in France. But by that time, I had received an email of the bank statements. The judge, looking at the bank statements, she said, well, this man wouldn't be motivated to stay here because the money that he makes in his country, he cannot possibly make it here in France. So I was released, and moreover, he has the visa. So I was released by the judge. So if you looked at my passport, the first time I entered France, it was not stamped. Why? Because I was released by the courts. Now, why am I saying this? The time I was at the airport, people that were coming from developed countries were passing without any questions. They are just stamping there. People that are coming from the United States don't need a visa to go to France. They just enter. For us, if you want to go to the UK, your passport, actually, if you're in Zambia, it has to go to South Africa, or it takes time. Why? Because we come from a poor country. So the only way we can be respected, and you see, by that time, I was a flourishing Zambian entrepreneur. I was 25 years old, I had trucks. I was the happening youth and respected youth locally. But out there, you will not be respected, provided the majority in your country, the majority in your continent are poor. The only way we'll be respected by the rest of the world is if we Africans stood together and put each other together and see how we can develop our country going forward and our continent going forward. Now, how can you do that? We have to be hungry. How can we be hungry? Realize that the future of the country and the future of the continent is dependent on me. The challenge that we have is we tend to think that someone else will have the solution to the challenges that we have. It will be the government, it will be this, it will be that one. Take it upon yourself. Now, what have I done as a person to help CAPE as an example? I have created an institute that trains people on entrepreneurship, on how you can enterprise practically. We are now launching within three weeks a tablet that teaches young people on how to enterprise. So let us realize that the solution of our continent and the solution of our countries is dependent on yourself and myself. We cannot continue giving an excuse of colonization for our failure. We cannot. All excuses expire. As such, let us own up and let us man up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. I'll have Mwilah give us closing remarks, and I think in 1 minute, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. I think for me, what I'd really love to say is that I think the future looks bright. I'll be honest. I'm glad to see Bertha. I'm glad to see Barrington. I'm glad to see you, Musonda. And I'm glad to see Dumisani. So there's already the elderly people we have here. It's Mr. Elias, and I'm just not trying to segregate, but I believe I have seen youthful vibe and youthful enthusiasm. And one thing I would love to say is that the future really, really looks bright. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. My apologies once again for coming in late, but I've learned a lot, and thank you so much.
Okay, Bertha, Miss Chulu, sorry.
Thank you. Show me a nation without an empowered child, and I'll show you a nation without a future. So what has been highlighted today is really cardinal to us moving forward. I hope and really pray we can move beyond to just us talking. We need to do the talk. So Africa is home to the most youthful population in the world. And so, like it has already been said, the key to us making it is having meaningful engagement, and that goes far beyond than just each one of us having recognizable roles to play in certain situations. I like it that it's an intergenerational dialogue. Madam Justina, Mr. Munshya, this is a time we need to embrace reverse mentorship. We need to ensure that the older generation is coming up to mentor the young generation just so we could move in one accord. So I'm grateful to be here. I'm thankful, I'm honored, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chungulo, any last words?
I would just like to add on what Dumisani said, like Zambia's greatest resource is not copper or the newly found gold or cobalt, It is the brains of young people like Mwilah, the brains of young people like Bertha, So as young people, we have to be responsible, we have to take part in national affairs, and we have to be hungry, just like Dumisani says, because we are the greatest resource of Zambia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chungulo. So I would wish to acknowledge the chair of the Global Peace, Mrs. Gracia Machel, who is also the chair of the African Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes, ACCORD, and one of the UN SDG advocates. Our great founder of the Global Peace and the executive director of ACCORD, Dr. Vusu Grounden, for this great initiative that has come to help and build the world better. I would also like to, thank the UN for giving us this opportunity, particularly UN75, and also to help us develop a better world and also help shape the future as we reach and also aim to as the UN turns 100 years. I would also want to thank, and also I earn a lot of gratitude to Mr. Kalawo Asmani, who's the coordinator of the International Generational Dialogue, and also Ms. Karishma Rojo for their extraordinary support for making sure this dialogue comes to pass. I would also like to thank you, the panelists, for taking your time to speak to people. I hope everyone, the listeners, this dialogue was very informative. I would also like to thank the team that made this particular webinar possible, who are in the back end with us. My team, Sandra Peza and Frank Peary, thank you so much for ensuring that everything was on point and we had everyone, all the panelists on time. I would also like to let everyone know that we have a survey that's available. Please take some time to be able to tell us what you think the UN should be, or what way do you have, or what you feel about the UN turning 100 in 2040. Thank you so much for everyone who joined us. Wherever you are, hope you have a lovely evening, a lovely morning, and a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much.